Okay, so welcome to the Varga class. Tonight we're going to learn just a very small portion of some of the techniques that I'm going to be teaching on my full-length course that starts on the 14th of January and is going to run consecutive Saturdays through the 2nd of September. But I will likely do a couple of extra classes on the end because often the syllabus doesn't get completed by that time. So before we really jump into what I had planned in terms of covering tonight, I just wanted to see how many of you have any familiarity with Varga charts, or what you might be, why you might have joined the course. So please feel free to chime in because your microphones are open. And see, that's what happens. You tell everybody you're doing a YouTube video and they go quiet. There we go.
Well, Michael, I mean, personally, I love your style. It's very different than a lot of what I've experienced. I've studied for so long and I've seen so many different techniques. I love, first of all, the way that you speak to people. And I know that sounds like such a simple thing, but it's a hard skill for an astrologer to develop.
Oh, thank you.
And then your insights are very unique. There's not a lot of people doing what you're teaching, especially the way that I've seen you go about in other videos. So I'm actually here to learn from your unique style. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind of you. Anybody else?
I'm really interested in learning how to interpret, your spouse chart and I say the D9. And maybe the career one, like which angles you look at it. Do you look at the Lord? What do you find the most important things out of it?
Well, that's good that you mentioned that because those are the two charts that we're going to cover tonight. We're going to work with the Navamsha and the Dashamsha because obviously I couldn't cover every single class. So what I'm going to do is go over a brief breakdown of how the divisional charts are all grouped together. And as I'm talking, opening up a document on my end so I can eventually share it with everybody. But the Varga charts are mathematical by nature because really what we're doing with the Varga charts, and this is obviously why they're called divisional charts, is we're taking a zodiac sign and we're carving it into equal portions based upon the number of the division. So obviously with the Rashi chart, that's the first divisional chart, so the sign isn't divided. With the Hora chart, the Hora is dividing the each Rashi into two 15-degree sections. When you get to the Drekana, it's 3 10-degree sections, and then all the way down to when you get to the Shastyamsha, which is carving a zodiac sign up into 60 equal portions. So being that the Varga charts are mathematical by nature, because really you have to divide in order to get them, there's a lot that you can do in terms of understanding how to work with the Varga charts by understanding some simple math. And we're going to cover just a small portion of that briefly. But one of the things we're going to talk about first of all are the 5 groups of Varga charts that are basically, here, let me clarify. There are what are called the Ashadha Vargas, which are the 16 divisional charts, and that's what I'm going to teach over the full-length course. But there's a way to break those 16 divisional charts down into 5 separate groups. And it's interesting because if you take 60 divisional charts and you divide that by 5, you get the number 12, or the number of Rashis. So I have a document here. Let me just bring it up on the screen. And we'll go over this. Okay. Actually, that's the wrong thing. I didn't want to do that. Let's try that again. That's what I wanted to do. Okay. And let's bring up the pointer tool. I'm going to mute everybody for just a minute. Okay. So basically, the way that we divide these divisional charts is obviously you have the first 12 divisional charts, of which Parashara speaks of using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, okay, which are the Rashi chart, the Hora, the Drekana, the Chaturtamsha, the Saptamsha, the Navamsha, the Dashamsha, and the Dwadashamsha, right? So that's the first group. And we'll go over all this other stuff here in a moment. The way that you determine which Varga charts fall into the second group, third group, fourth group, and fifth group, etc., is by the following. So if you can take the Varga chart, such as the Shadamsha chart, and you can divide it by 12, and there's a remainder, then it's going to fall into the second group. Or if you can do it, divide it by 12 once or twice with no remainder, it falls into the second group. So obviously, if you have to do it more than twice and you've got a remainder, then it's going to fall into another group. So I'll give you an example. Let's say we're talking about the 27th divisional chart, which we can obviously see is in the third group. Well, if you take the 27th and you divide it by 12, well, that's going to leave you, or rather if you subtract 12, it's probably an easier way to say it. If you subtract 12 once, you're going to get 15, right? And so that's still more than 12. And if you subtract 12 again, then you're going to get 3. So that means that the 27th follows in the third division. Same with the 30th, right? If you subtract 12 from that, you'll get 18. And so you'll obviously have to subtract 12 again to make it fall in the third, right? But let's say you had the 24th divisional chart. You subtract 12 from that, you get the 12th divisional chart, right? So then if you subtract 12 again, you go all the way down to 0. So basically, if the Varga is able to have 12 subtracted from it once, with a remainder, or twice with no remainder, then it falls into the second group. If it's able to have 12 subtracted from it 3 times, or twice with the remainder and 3 times with no remainder, then it falls into the third group. So twice with a remainder, 3 times with no remainder, it falls into the third group, okay? If it's divisible by, or if you could, division works as well, but it's probably easier to say if you subtract 12, and you can do that 3 times with the remainder or 4 times with no remainder, then it falls into the fourth group. And if it's divisible by, or if you can subtract 12 from it 5 times or 4 times, I should say, rather, with the remainder, 5 times with no remainder, then it falls into the fifth group. So the first group is you don't need to subtract 12. Second group is if you subtract 12 once with the remainder or twice and there's no remainder, then it falls into the second. For the third group, if you subtract 12 twice with a remainder and 3 times with no remainder, then it's in the third. And if you subtract 12 3 times with the remainder, 4 times with no remainder, then it falls into the fourth. And if you can subtract 12 4 times with the remainder or 5 times with no remainder, it falls into the fifth group. So the only Varga that falls into that fifth group is the Shastyamsha. So obviously if we subtract 12 once, we get 48. Subtract 12 twice, 36. Third time, 24. Fourth time, 12, there's still a remainder. So the fifth time, there's no remainder. So basically that makes it fall in the fifth group. So I'm going to pause for a moment and see if anybody has any questions on that so far. Did everybody understand what I was talking about with that?
Michael, this is very interesting. I just have a quick question. What is the source of this? Did you just...
Actually, I learned this from Ernst, but I think that he pulled it from a book, which I have found like about 6 months ago, called Vargas, A Vedic Approach.
It's very beautiful. I love the connection with the 5 elements, and it's very
Yeah.
profound. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Sure, no worries. Yep. So everybody got that to a certain extent. Of course, it's easy to just kind of remember and go, all of these are in this one, right? Okay.
Yes, beautiful.
All right. So, and of course, you'll have it on the video too. So I'm going to mute everybody again. Okay. So this is what makes all these different groups different or unique, right? So the first group, right? The first group has the Rashi chart in it, the Hora, the Drekana, or the D3, the Chaturtamsha, or the D4, saying both the divisional name too, because I know there's a lot of people who don't know the words for it, so just so they understand. The Saptamsha, or the D7, the Navamsha, or the D9, the Dashamsha, the D10, and the Dwadashamsha. So what constitutes those things that fall into this first group is these are the concrete things in our life, or the realm of existence in which we operate. Now, obviously, with a lot of these Varga charts, you can go deeper than that and pull a lot of deeper things out of it. But the best way to understand the relation to these things is the fact that the first group is related to concrete things and the realm of our existence. So then you look at that and you see that it's connected with the element of ether. And so then you kind of go, okay, well, ether is the sky though. So what does that have to do with, the earth on one level, which is where we exist? Well, ether creates the space that we live in. And so the first group is associated with the element of ether. So what do we have with those things, right? So with the Rashi chart, we've got the path of the individual, the path of the individual's life, right? With the Hora chart, well, on many levels, that's related to finances, but it goes a little bit deeper than that, because the Hora chart is related to having our needs fulfilled. Basically, it relates to that aspect of wealth that we have in our life that allows us to take care of our responsibilities and to take care of our needs. The Drekana chart is related to siblings. On another level, it's also how we associate with other individuals. It's how we express ourselves, which if you think about it, if you have siblings, and some of us don't, the siblings are our first interaction with other individuals, and interacting with other people aside from our mother and father. So it has a very deep connection to our upbringing and how we're raised and how we're going to tend to socialize with other people. But a good way to understand it is the expression of our will, how our will is expressed, right? And it's also connected with siblings. And there's a connection between siblings and how we express our will, because we've heard of the concept of sibling rivalry. These siblings are one of the first areas where our will gets tested, right? Then we've got the Chaturtamsha, or the fourth divisional chart. And the Chaturtamsha is related to fortune, the fortunate things that we're capable of having in our lives. And that goes much deeper than just finances. But in its relation to finances, it's connected to more of things like savings accounts or fixed assets. But equally, we can look at the body, the health of the body, through the D4 chart too, because it'll show whether we're fortunate enough to have good health in our body, right? And we can also look at relationships through the D4 too, because it'll show whether we're fortunate enough to have good interactions with other people. So these divisional charts each have a greater use than just the simple concept that they're associated with. Then we've got the Saptamsha, which is related to our lineage or our dynasty, what we leave behind. So on that level, it's connected to creativity. It's associated with children. It's also how we tend to co-create with other individuals. So we can look at that for relationships as well. Then we've got the Navamsha chart, which is would be related to our spouse if we're married, or the things that we find purpose in on our path in life. is another way of understanding it. The Dashamsha. Now with the Dashamsha, a lot of people think that the Dashamsha is just about career, but the Dashamsha actually goes much deeper than that. It's also about the great fruits or the great successes that we have with anything in our life, right? But we tend to identify the greatest successes with fulfilling our vocation and how successful we are with our vocation. So it tends to fit in with that. And with the Dwadashamsha, we're looking at ancestors, one's parents, one's relatives, distant relatives, siblings. So these are all the concrete things in our realm of existence, right? So then they fit in with Vargas 1 through 12. But Parashara only states that we should use 16 different Varga charts. And of course, the rest of those Varga charts do have a use, but you can find most everything in one of these 16 divisional charts, which are going to be covered on the course. So then we've got the second group, right? The second group, which involves the Shadamsha, which is the 16th divisional chart, the Vimshamsha, which is the 20th divisional chart, and the Chaturvimshamsha, which is the 24th divisional chart. This is sometimes called the Siddhamsha as well. So basically with this group of divisional charts, we're looking at the relationship that the individual is going to have to all of these concrete things that are in their life, right? The Shadamsha chart, what Parashara says about the Shadamsha chart is it's about conveyances. But what is that on a deeper level? It's about things moving. Right? Does something move us? Does it make us happy? And I always think of a good way to remember some of the other things that the Shadamsha is about, aside from vehicles and cars, is there was a John Lennon song called Whatever Gets You Through the Night. So basically, vehicles get us through. So the Shadamsha shows whether we're able to be happy or moved by things, or whether our life tends to be somewhat unhappy or depressing. So if there's a weak Shadamsha, the individual might be more depressed than they are happy. The Vimshamsha chart is about devotion. Are we able to be devoted to those things that are in our life, and more especially to our life in general, to the path that evolves our soul? That would be looked at through the Vimshamsha. And then we've got the Chaturvimshamsha, which is the 24th divisional chart, which is about understanding. Are we able to understand the reason those things are in our lives? And I always like using this particular analogy, which is you might see through looking at somebody's Navamsha chart that the indicators for spouse are showing that the person has, a very good spouse, very good partner to spend their life with. And then spouse could be weak in the Chaturvimshamsha. And you might find that this person has a really wonderful relationship, but they don't understand how important that relationship is, or they may not understand their partner at all. And so the relationship doesn't really work as well as it might otherwise do so, dependent upon other factors in the chart. So this is more how the individual is relating to those particular things. And the second group is associated with the element of air. Because what does air do? It moves things, it blows things around, it can displace things, right? And so the second group is about the things that move us, or how we move ourselves, how we are motivated to displace those things in our life that we no longer want to have in there, such as if we have an unhappy Shadamsha chart, well, what do we need to get rid of in order to make our life happier, right? Then we've got the third group of divisional charts, which are the 25th to the 36th, of which Parashara speaks of two that we're meant to work with, which are the Bamsha, which is the 27th divisional chart, and the Trimshamsha, which is the 30th divisional chart. Among other things, what the Vamsha is used for is the skill or the strength with which we apply our will. The strength, skill, the efficiency, maybe that's the better word, with which we're able to apply our will so that we're able to achieve those things in life that we want to achieve and overcome those difficulties that are in our path, right? The Vamsha is also about the hunger that we have for those things in our life. Are we able to achieve bringing those things into our life? Are we able to overcome the obstacles that are keeping us from having all of those concrete things in our life? And in addition, those things in the second group too, can we overcome the challenges that keep us from being happy or that keep us from being devoted? All of that can be shown through the Vamsha chart. So a good way to understand this third group is once those things are already in our life, and once we already have a relationship to those things in our life, then all sorts of other things arise, such as hunger or desire or problems with those things that are in our life that we need to maintain. And that's where the Trimshamsha comes in, which is associated with arishtas or fatalities, so to speak. And it's also looked at for health. It's good for understanding the difficulties that are there in one's life, whether those difficulties are insurmountable or whether we have the strength with which to surmount some of the problems that might arise in our life. And I don't know if I said, but the Trimshamsha is also looked at for health, so to speak. So it's related, the third group, to the element of fire. Fire is what we use to cook our food. So fire, pardon me, is also associated with passion, which can be associated with hunger. And it's also connected with our need to feed, so to speak. So that's the third group of divisional charts associated with fire. Okay? Then we get to the fourth and the fifth group, of which a lot of people have never really worked with any of these divisional charts, but they're very meaningful divisional charts to understand. And we're going to go over those and talk about what those are about. So basically with the numbers 37 to 48, these allow the healthy growth of these things that we already have in our life, the concrete things in our life, our relationship to those concrete things, the healthy growth of our capacity to combat all of these difficulties, right? It's also associated with fine-tuning those things that are in our life. And with this particular group, we have two divisional charts, which are the Kavadamsha and the Akshavadamsha. So basically, the Kavadamsha is associated with the auspiciousness and inauspiciousness that comes into our life. Are we fortunate enough to have all of these things in our life on a good level? Or are we unfortunate enough to have all of these things in our life on a bad level, right? So you can look at it in terms of luck, right? So in order for good things to happen in our life, we need to have a good, strong Kavadamsha chart. Then you've got the Akshavadamsha, which is related to having things in your life that you feel are purposeful, right? So the Kavadamsha is about, do we have good luck for things to come into our life? And once those things are in our life, are they purposeful to us? And in a nutshell, that's the D40 and the D45. This group is connected to water, which brings the power of cohesion, right? I do a rectification technique, and actually I'm going to be doing a course on these rectification techniques, which starts the day after the Varga course. And in that particular course, we'll be working a lot with these charts, the 40th, the 45th, and the 60th divisional chart, in addition to the Vargas specific to each event, because these last three charts are really important in terms of fine-tuning things in our life. So things happening in our life, we really want to see them happening in these three divisional charts, especially the big events in our life, right? So then we've got the fifth group. whereas the fourth group is looked at to fine-tune things, right? The fifth group is used to filter, and it's associated with the element of earth. I often like to define the Dashamsha chart as being about our accrued karma. But the reason that it's connected with that is it's associated with the physical reality of what we can have. Have we accrued enough good merit in previous lifetimes to have those good things in our life, or have we not accrued enough merit to have those particular factors in our life? And those things can be discovered through looking at the Dashamsha chart. And the Dashamsha chart is a very important chart to look at, especially in terms of understanding the karmic path of the individual, right? I would say the very key charts that you'd want to look at in terms of understanding an individual's karma, and I'm giving you a quick technique here, is but to look at the nodes, Ketu and Rahu, in the Rashi chart, in the Dashamsha chart, and in the Dashamsha chart. And you'll have a very deep understanding of an individual's karmic path. And let me explain that a little bit, right? This is more of the accrued karma of several different lifetimes. By the way, it's associated with the element of earth, if I didn't say that. Accrued karma for several different lifetimes. And so you'll find that this is a lot of the deep-seated karma that has been attained over several different lifetimes. And that's what actually creates the physical reality of what we can have. Then you've got the Rashi chart, which is the actual life path that we're going through. And the importance of the Dashamsha in there is it relates to our ancestors who are there to kind of, especially our mother, father, and siblings, to kind of create the first encoding of how we're going to work out our karmic path in this particular lifetime. They create the influences that really tend to mold the karma that we go through as individuals, right? So I'm going to pause here and see if anybody has any questions about anything we just spoke about. Anybody?
I have a couple questions, but I don't know if you want to answer them now. But I guess, are you able to tell us like what you would notice out of, so if somebody wanted to know if they had a long-term illness or if it was treatable, kind of like you said, and because I had somebody that said, asked about ulcerative colitis, and if it was something that they could get over, and they were in their Saturn dasha, but Saturn was in a good place. So is there any triggers that you would say you could look at?
Well, I mean, among other things, you would want to look at the strength of Saturn in the 30th divisional chart, in addition to the strength of Saturn in the Rashi chart. You'd want to look at the 6th house. Aside from looking at health, the 6th house is also important to the digestive system, right? Mm-hmm. So these are all things that you'd want to look at, but you may find it strong in one of those charts and weak in one of the other charts, and that tends to create a little bit of confusion because you have to figure out which one is going to override it. If you've got it strong in the Rashi chart but weak in the Dashamsha chart, then the individual is likely going to be able to walk the path that helps them to overcome that illness. If it's weak in both of those charts, then that's going to be an illness that's very difficult to overcome. But there's a lot of factors pardon me, that you'd have to look at in order to really understand that. So it might be something that might be better for you to refer to me, for me to answer individually, because it would be a long-winded process.
Yeah. Okay.
Anybody else?
Michael,
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of curious if at some point in the course you're going to be speaking on the lords of the Vargas.
Define what you mean by lords.
For instance, you have the D45. As you know, you have a whole set of lords. So you have Vidhi,
the Varga deity.
Yes, and then the D60 chart, of course, we have like Amrita, I believe, Deva, Soumya. You have those different. I find them very important. I was just curious if there's a point that you're going to get to where you do discuss those.
We're going to do that with each individual Varga chart.
Oh, lovely. Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Love that.
And there's a lot of really profound work you can do, just kind of sharing this with you. If you work with house cusps in addition to equal house, if you look at the house cusp and you look at the house
Mhm.
cusp nakshatra, and you look at the deity associated with the house cusp, you can do a lot of really deep work with the chart.
Oh, I love that. Thank you.
And I actually asked, that's why I asked Ernst to put that in the latest version of Kala, because there's a lot
Oh
of
my
really deep
God.
stuff you can do with it. So,
Oh, so I have you to thank for that. Wonderful.
I begged him to do that because I was going,
Thank
oh, I
you.
want to play with that. So,
Thank you,
yeah.
Michael.
Okay. Anybody else? Nope. Okay. Well, what we're going to do next, I believe, I'm going to mute everybody first. It's funny. I don't know what happened to everybody tonight. We had 30 people who said they wanted to come and they all disappeared. It must have been my threat to wear a tutu and dance around on camera. So I'm going to mute everybody. There we go. So I thought that we would start by talking about the Navamsha chart because it's a very important chart. But first we're going to talk a little bit about the Rashi chart too. So we'll talk about the Rashi and the Dashamsha chart. And some of the simple math, I'm not going to go too deeply into this because it's a rather long-winded subject and I don't think we'd have time for it tonight. So let me see if I have that. There we go. That's what I wanted. Okay. So let's talk about the Rashi chart first. So each of the divisional charts can be understood by looking at the number of the divisional chart. So the Rashi chart being the first divisional chart, obviously it relates to the number 1, and you can relate that to a bhava, which is the first bhava. So what is that about? That's about the self, how the individual perceives things, because it's about the head and how their sense of cognizance, how they see things. So it's about the path that the individual is on. So the Rashi chart is about the path. And I didn't put that in here, but we'll go ahead and cover this too, which is the critical planet that we want to look at in the Rashi chart. As the Rashi chart is the first chart, we'd want to look at the first planet, and that's the sun, which makes sense because the sun is the Atman, or the soul of everything, and related to our own individual soul. So it defines the soul kind of walking down its path in life. So sometimes while we're on that subject, you'll find that you look at things related to a particular house or a particular planet in the Rashi chart, and you look at it in a particular Varga chart, and one seems weak and the other one seems strong. So let's say, for instance, you've got a strong Rashi chart. Let's say we're looking at relationships, so to speak. And the relationship indicators in the Rashi chart are strong, but say in the Navamsha chart, they're weak, right? Well, on one level, that means that those areas of life can have a little bit of a weak foundation upon which to operate. But the individual may be able to compensate for that on their individual path because there's strength for that in the Rashi chart. So they can implement things into their lives to create those changes. Let's say, for instance, you had the Navamsha chart strong, but the Rashi chart weak. And if the Navamsha chart had a lot of strong indications for good, healthy relationships, but the Rashi chart showed a lot of weakness, well, that means that while that potential is there, the individual may have a hard time implementing the things that they need to bring into their life in order to keep their relationships healthy. So ultimately, you like to see both of those charts, both the Rashi chart and the Varga chart for relationships. In this instance, talking about the Navamsha rather than the Saptamsha, because we're going to go into the Navamsha. You want to see both of those strong, ideally. But if you've got the Rashi chart weak, but the Navamsha chart strong, then there's potential but difficulty implementing it. And if you've got a strong Rashi chart but a weak Navamsha chart, then the individual may be able to compensate for a weak foundation in order to make things work. So let's talk a little bit about what the Navamsha chart is about. Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, with each of the Varga charts, it gives a very simple thing associated with each Varga chart. It's mainly so we can understand it. And if we want to understand that the first group of Vargas are associated with concrete things in our lives, well, obviously the Navamsha would have to be associated with concrete things too. And so that means spouse. But the Navamsha chart is much deeper than that, right? And most of us who are working with Vedic astrology will look at the Navamsha chart to sort of understand the soul that's underneath the surface. But really, on a certain level, that kind of fits in with spouse as well, because the relationship with the soul is that one relationship that's lasting for an eternity, even longer than your relationship with your spouse in this particular lifetime. I mean, granted, some relationships go over several different lifetimes, but the one lifetime that's eternal is your relationship to your soul. So that's obviously the first spouse, so to speak, and that's how we can get an understanding of some of the deeper connotations of the Navamsha chart. And a good way to understand this particular divisional chart is to look at the bhava that it's associated with, which is the 9th house, which is the house of dharma, law, philosophy, culture, all of these things which tend to define the path of a person, right? And so you might be thinking, okay, but the Rashi chart is the path. Well, the Rashi chart is the path of the individual, but it's the Navamsha chart that defines this path in a meaningful way to the person, so as the person can feel anchored in their path and dedicated to their path. So a good way to understand the Navamsha chart is it's connected with those things in our life that we find purpose in. And if your mind is working on things I said earlier, you'll also go, okay, but you also said that about, pardon me, the 45th divisional chart. Well, that is the case. And if you take the number 4 and 5 and you add it together, you get the number 9. And there's a connection between the Navamsha chart and the Akshavadamsha chart as well, or the 45th divisional chart. It's just more on a higher level, whereas the Navamsha chart is within our concrete existence, within this lifetime. It's those things on our concrete path that we find to be purposeful. Now, obviously, if you married someone, hopefully you married them because you found purpose in being with them. If not, maybe you married them because you found purpose in getting married, so to speak. And so that's one of the ways that that basically marriage can relate to the Navamsha chart. So in order to understand the critical planet associated with each divisional chart, right? Well, generally, one would think that you could start, since we started with the sun, the number 1, then, the first divisional chart would be the sun. Second divisional chart actually is associated with the moon. Third, Mars. Fourth, Mercury. The Saptamsha chart is related to Jupiter, obviously. And so then you're going, okay, well, Venus isn't the 9th planet, but basically the Navamsha chart, if we go back to our original screen here, we'll see that it's the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th chart given by Parashara. So basically, we'd want to look at the 6th planet, which is Venus. So Venus is the critical planet associated with the Navamsha. Now, in terms of relationships, that makes a lot of sense. Venus is the planet of love. But Venus is also the minister of the royal court of planets. So basically it's Venus that gives us the capacity to make wise decisions about those things that we have in our life, right? Is this person worthwhile to be with? Am I making a good decision by being with this person? So Venus is the minister in worldly affairs. Am I doing the right things on my particular path? So in order to see a good, strong Navamsha chart, you want to see a good, solid Venus in that particular Navamsha chart, right? Then we want to look at the critical bhavas that are associated with the Navamsha chart, right? And there's a particular way that we go about finding the critical bhavas associated with each Varga chart. Well, the first is taking the simple number of the divisional chart, which is the 9th, right? And then the second is by seeing if that can be reduced to another number. Let's say, for instance, if you're looking at the 12th divisional chart, you can add 1 and 2 together and you get the number 3. Well, with the number 9, you can't do any reduction on that, right? Then the next way to see if there's another important house in a Varga chart is to add all the numbers that lead up to that number together. So for instance, if we were to take the number 9, if we add 1 plus 2, we get 3. 3 plus 3, we get 6. 6 plus 4, we get 10. 10 plus 5, we get 15. 15 plus 6, we get 21. 21 plus 7, we get 28. 28 plus 8, we get 36. 36 plus 9, we get 45. So then you have the number 45, you add 4 and 5 together, and you get the 9th house again, okay? Then some of these divisional charts, you'll be able to take the square root of the number of the divisional chart, as in this case. So the square root of 9 is 3. And there's a reason that all these things are important. I'm going to go more into depth on that on the Varga course, but just for our simple purposes tonight, the square root of 9 would be 3. So the 3rd and the 9th so far are the important charts. And another manipulation you can do on the number is to take the number and actually square it. So if you square 9 times 9, you get 81, and 8 plus 1 equals 9. So these are the critical bhavas of the Navamsha chart, right? These are the things you want to examine first of all in every single Navamsha chart you look at in order to see the foundation of that chart, to see if it's weak or to see if it's strong. So I'm going to try to go over this in the Dashamsha chart as quickly as I can and then do a couple of examples and see what we have time for left at the end. The deities connected with the Navamsha chart are the Devas, Nri, and Rakshasa. So the Devas, if we remember throughout mythology, are often sent down to the earth for some purpose, or they're cursed and they have to take a human birth. So with planets that are in a Deva Navamsha, quite often in regards to that planet, the individual may feel like they're kind of stuck in a world that they can't really relate to. If that planet is strong, they will take a heavenly purpose with the planet that is associated with it, apply a lot of spiritual energy to the planet as if they feel they have a higher purpose. If that planet is weak, they may feel overly sensitive in relation to that planet or wish that they could somehow escape what they have to do with that particular planet. Then you've got Nri, which is basically the same as Manusha or human. So planets in a Nri Navamsha are the individual will approach things in a practical way and with a desire to be productive in relation to that particular planet, right? If it's in a Nri Navamsha chart, because the Nri related to humans are here to manage life on Earth in the most effective manner, right? So they're here to live a worldly life. So it's about doing things practically, right? If it's in an unfavorable state, then they can be unhappy with those things that they produce in their life or frustrated. If it's good and strong, then they're able to be productive with that particular planet. Then you've got the troublemakers, the Rakshasas. So if a planet is in a Rakshasa Navamsha, they're going to do things in a very unorthodox manner. They're going to want to take a more radical approach to the planet that they're dealing with. That can be good or bad. So some people may do things in a very unorthodox manner and innovate things in relation to a specific planet, or take a path that nobody else would take and have that path turn out to be productive. Whereas if that planet's weak, then basically the individual might be a little bit destructive with that planet because they're not using it in a good capacity, right? So that's it for the Navamsha. And once you've looked at those things, then you can obviously look at all the other factors that are there in the chart. You can read each divisional chart just like a regular chart, but these are some of the important foundational things that will create a good or a weak Navamsha chart. So let's move on to the Dashamsha. I may have to move through that one a little more quickly just so we can fit everything in. So I've kind of already defined how we come up with the math, so we're just going to stick with the critical bhavas that are here, right? Because obviously if you take the number 10 and reduce it, you get the number 1, right? And so you can see the 1st and the 10th are the critical bhavas. So actually, if we remember, Venus is the 6th planet, Saturn is the 7th planet, and the Dashamsha is the 7th Varga chart that Parashara gives. And the critical planet in the Dashamsha chart is Saturn. And so why Saturn? Because we think of Saturn as being this really difficult planet. But Saturn also gives us the discipline, and it helps us to really stick with something long enough to make it happen. In terms of Jaimini astrology, Saturn is actually the karaka for career. So it's Saturn's a very important planet to a person's career, and you'll find people who have weak Saturns, generally in their Dashamsha chart, they have a hard time sticking with something long enough to make it happen, right? And the critical bhavas are the 1st and the 10th. Let's go back a second. So in terms of relationships, let's kind of touch on this for a second. With the Navamsha chart, right, the 9th will show, do we find purpose being with this person, right? Marriage equally is a legal matter. So that's 9th house associated with. Long-term relationships are more 9th house than they are 7th house. Of course, the 7th house is important to that. But in order for us to find purpose in a relationship, there also has to be some 9th house energy there as well. And it's interesting because the 9th is the 3rd from the 7th. So there's a lot of meaning to that. But how does the 3rd fit in? Well, if we're in a relationship and we have a strong 3rd house, if there are problems, we'll want to put a lot of effort into solving those problems. If there's a weak 3rd house, we can care less, really. So, and you'll find that happens in a lot of charts. If there's a weak 3rd house, that individual may not want to put a lot of effort into resolving any of the relationship problems. Okay, let's go back to our Dashamsha chart. So the 10th is the 1st at a higher level. The 10th house is also the house that's directly above us in the sky at the time that we're born. So it takes the pinnacle in the sky, right? So basically the 1st house is our life here on the planet. The 10th house is our life at the heights, you know, directly above us, the highest point for us, right? And so it takes the 1st house and it amplifies it. So the 1st house is the path to success, because the Dashamsha chart brings the great fruits in one's life. And that's not always just associated with career. You can look at success with anything in the Dashamsha chart, okay? And the ability to stick with things through the Dashamsha chart by the strength of Saturn. So the Dashamsha is associated with success, but obviously career success tends to be the most important to us, right? So the 1st and the 10th are the critical bhavas here. So in terms of examining the critical bhavas, among the factors we'd want to look at would be the strength of the planet that rules that particular house, what planets are placed in it, difficult aspects it might be receiving, etc. Yeah. And in terms of doing the Varga charts, you always want to work with Rashi aspects. Because the only planetary aspects that happen in a horoscope are in the Rashi chart, because the Rashi chart is the chart of astronomy. So unless the planetary aspect is in the Rashi chart, it's not going to exist in the Varga chart. And that's why sometimes if you've worked with planetary aspects in the Varga charts, it doesn't always work out to be the most accurate because the actual planetary aspect has to be there in the Rashi chart for it to work, because a planetary aspect is an astronomical occurrence. So you want to, in order to do really accurate astrology, you'll find you do better working with Rashi aspects in the Varga charts. There's more I have to say on that, but I don't think we'll have time to get to that tonight. We'll see at the end. So let's talk about the deities that are connected to the Dashamsha chart, which are Indra, Agni, Yama. Again, we see Rakshasha, Varuna, Maruta, Kubera, Ishana, and I may mispronounce some of these things, please pardon me if I do, Padmaja, and Ananta. Okay, so if a planet is in an Indra Dashamsha, then it can give one the power to rise above any obstacles to success, if it's strong. If it's weak, then it does the opposite. It means that one feels they don't have the power to rise above the obstacles to their success. Planets in Agni Dashamshas give connection and support to provide success, right? Do other people give you the warmth and support that you need on your path so you can be successful? So obviously if that's strong, then that's a yes. If it's weak, there's little connection or problems with having support in that regard. Then we've got Yama Dashamshas. Planets in Yama Dashamshas give the discipline to bring success. Some ways that manifests are, are you able to restrain yourself from doing stupid things and making mistakes on your path to success? Well, if you've got a weak planet in a Yama Dashamsha, then there can be difficulty doing that. If it's strong, then you've got the discipline with which to create success with that planet. Then you've got planets in a Rakshasha Dashamsha. These planets are going to ruthlessly destroy and overcome obstacles to their success. They'll take some unorthodox approach towards overturning the tables or turning the tables on something that's blocking them, if it's strong, right? If it's a weak planet, then they'll, kind of become somewhat self-destructive in terms of creating that. So then you've got the Varuna Dashamshas. This is one of my favorite ones, right? So if you've got somebody coming to you and they're wanting to know if they can make this vision that they have really work out, right? Well, you'd ultimately want to see some strong 10th house related planets, like maybe the planet that rules the 10th house in the Dashamsha, in a Varuna Dashamsha, and see that planet strong, because that gives them the power to hold on to a vision until it's realized. If that planet is weak, then they don't have the power to hold on to that vision. They'll likely give up on the process. Or let's say, for instance, you've got somebody coming to you and they're going, I'm thinking about making a job change, right? And let's say they've got a planet in a Maruta Dashamsha. If that planet is weak and they're wanting to know if they should make a job change, then they may have the capacity to not make a wise choice, because the Maruta Dashamshas give the power to make wise changes needed to be successful. If they've got a strong Maruta planet, then they can do well with that. Then you've got the Kubera Dashamshas. Kubera Dashamshas give the capacity to use the wealth that one has in order to build more success, and equally the capacity to enjoy that success, right? So if somebody has a weak planet in a Kubera Dashamsha, then they could be the most successful person in the world, but they're not going to be able to enjoy it, right? If it's strong, then they'll really be able to enjoy that success and use what they have to actually build upon that success. Ishana Dashamshas. Ishanas give the capacity to manage things, to rule over all the aspects of one's life that one needs to keep in check in order to promote success. It gives the capacity to keep an eye on everything, so to speak. If it's weak, then it's difficult to do that. If you've got a planet in a Padmaja Dashamsha, that gives the creative ability to create great successes. Padmaja is a name of Brahma, and so that's one of the associations with this. So if it's weak, then the person may not make wise creative decisions, and these areas can fall apart, right? They may not be able to, they'll come up with some harebrained scheme or something like that if it's a weak planet. And Ananta Dashamshas, they give success from what one already has available to them, and the capacity to find success in what has already been accomplished. Because Ananta is the serpent that supports Vishnu. So it gives success from what one already has available to them, the foundation, and the capacity to find success in what has already been accomplished. Okay? So we're going to take a break here and see if anybody has questions. With any leftover time, we'll take a look at an example or two. I was hoping to have a little more time, but I've only got about another half hour here. So we'll see what we can fit in during that time. So does anybody have any questions? Please feel free to ask.
No, this is wonderful, Michael. Thank you.
No worries, no worries. Anybody else? Susan?
So yeah, I do have one actually. So we have 10 deities. So maybe one or several of these deities are active in more than one bhava?
These are not necessarily associated with bhavas, so to speak, but bhavas, if you use house cusps, will be in a particular divisional chart. What these are associated with is if you took the sign of Aries, or any sign, so to speak, and you carved it into 10 equal portions of 3 degrees each, a planet or a house cusp in the first 3 degrees would be an Indra. Well, actually, it's different for it's different for, if it's in the first of an odd Rashi, it'll be an Indra. Even Rashi, it would be an Ananta. But let's not get into the confusing side of it. Let's just say we're talking about Aries. First 3 degrees would be Indra. Second 3 degrees would be Agni. Third, Yama. Fourth, Rakshasha. And so on and so forth. And you go opposite if it's an even sign. Yeah. And so you can have, you know, planets in all sorts of these things and house cusps in all sorts of these things.
Okay, so if it's an even house, then can you just go through that example, please?
Well, if we were starting with say Taurus, an even sign, yeah? If you're starting with Taurus, the first Dashamsha would be Ananta. The second would be Padmaja. The third would be Ishana. Yeah, and working backwards to it. So it's backwards for the even and forward for the odd. Can anybody tell me why? There's a reason.
Because the first house is negative, the second one's positive.
Well, vice versa. The first house would be considered more masculine by nature, and so it's going to be active, right? And so things would move forward from that. Whereas the even signs are more receptive, so they receive from behind them. So with even things, you move backwards. And actually, if you do Jaimini astrology, quite often you're reading charts backwards in relation to even signs and things like that. So you'll find that happens a lot in Vedic astrology, that you have some things that you go backwards and some things that you go forward. And it's usually with odd and even signs. Okay. Anybody else?
So I guess I have one more question around that theme, and that is, so let's say we're going to take the 6th house, and the 6th house would be a feminine energy, correct?
No, we're not doing this with houses. This is associated with Rashis. Now, Rashis can
Okay.
become a house, but they're not always a house. Yeah. So you wouldn't take the 6th house. You would take the, let's say, you would look at the sign you're looking at, right?
That's what I meant to say. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Oh, so you mean the natural 6th house, which would be Virgo. Yeah, so that would be a receptive thing. So the first 3 degrees of Virgo would be Ananta, 2nd, Padmaja, 3rd,
Oh, okay.
Dishana. Yeah.
Okay, you always start either at 1 or at 10. That's what I was trying to get at.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. All right. And with some, that's a good question, because with some Varga charts, you don't. Sometimes you start, the 2nd one in. But on this course, I'm likely not going to talk about how they're divided and created, because it eats up a lot of time in terms of understanding it. Yeah. But there is a specific mathematical way that all these different deities are determined, and it's all about how it's divided, and it's a process that becomes very hard to remember.
Okay.
You'll do well if you just remember the deities and the critical bhavas and the critical planet.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Anybody else with the question? Okay, why don't we look at some examples? I'm going to mute everybody. Okay, I need to open up my astrology software. And you may see your screen go black until I open that up for you. There we go. Let's do this, open. And let's look at Bill Gates's chart. Now, those of you who have taken my courses previously, there are 2 different ways. One way, which I'm just beginning to play around with, to work with these numbers down here. One is by looking at pure Shadbala, and the other one is by incorporating different avastas or strengths. We're not going to go deeply into that tonight. We're just going to look at the Shadbala associated with the planet and see if we can understand a lot of the strength or weakness of the planet in regards to that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to this screen. By the way, if you don't have Kala Vedic astrology software, if you're serious about doing astrology, I highly recommend doing it, because it does a lot of things that other Vedic astrology software can't do. It's very powerful software and very good. These numbers that you see, these blue numbers, are actual house cusps. Aside from just looking at equal house, so to speak, as in Scorpio being the 1st house, Sagittarius 2nd, Capricorn 3rd. And you'll notice that you'll see here that, like in the 4th house, you've got the 5th and the 8th house cusp. And so the way that that's happening is it's based upon how the chart is divided. Those house cusps are going to be in a different sign, right? It's all because of how the particular Rashi is divided itself, okay? All these numbers that you see over here, just touching on it briefly, are planetary aspects, or a planet being in a particular planet's sign in the Varga chart, or a planetary aspect from the Rashi chart. In short, what you're seeing is one planet's influence upon another. So where you're seeing green numbers, that's a planet helping another planet. Where you're seeing red numbers, that's a planet hindering another planet. And so when a planet becomes too hindered, it has a hard time managing the responsibilities to its house cusp. And this is mainly related to what's called the Lajatati Avastas, which is going to be a little miniature course that I'm going to do on this Varga course. And if you've taken my previous courses, you may have done some of this, but we're going to incorporate just looking at it through the full Shadbala of a planet this time around too, because it's there's a lot of very powerful things that you can look at. But I'm not going to go too deeply into that tonight. So let's look at Bill Gates's Dashamsha chart. So basically, the minimum Shadbala that Saturn is supposed to have in order to be strong enough to handle its responsibilities is 300 rupas. Okay? Basically, this number is not as accurate as the number that's down here. Here we see Saturn with 406 rupas. This is a very strong Saturn. So basically, with this particular Saturn, if we're looking at Saturn as the critical planet in the Dashamsha chart, sorry, I tell you what, let me do this too, because I know some of you are more North Indian in terms of your divisional charts. Let's make that available to everybody. And let's change this to the Dashamsha. And I'll need to bring one up down here so we can bring up the Varga deities as well. Okay. So here we've got this strong Saturn, which is the critical planet in the Dashamsha chart. So obviously having a strong Saturn is going to help Bill Gates to be successful. How is that 10th cusp? You'll find you get more accuracy, even though this does end up working out as the 10th equal house. If you're able to do house cusps and equal house together, you'll get more accuracy. House cusps will tend to give you more precision in relation to a house. So when we're looking at the 10th Lord, we're looking at Venus. Well, the minimum strength that Venus is supposed to have is 394 points. I'm sorry, I got that wrong, 330 points, but Venus has 394 points. So Venus is equally strong enough to make him successful, as we have seen. And here's some interesting things too, right? Basically, we'd want to examine the strength of the first house too, and that's in Leo. Basically, a strong sun would have to be 390 points. His sun, as we can see, is 414 points. So a very strong, successful Dashamsha, because we see Saturn in Aquarius, its own sign, right? You see, Saturn is, for those of you who don't know all your associations, Saturn is Mula Trikona, and we've got the sun in its own house. Okay, and if you look at this initially, you might go, this is an opposition, but this is what I was saying earlier. You'll find if you do planetary aspects in the Dashamsha chart or any other Varga chart, they don't end up being as accurate. What you need to see is if there is a straight planetary aspect from the, sorry, I meant to bring something up, it didn't come up, from the Rashi chart. Okay, it wants me to close that first. Let's bring this up. There we go. And here you can see that in the Rashi chart, you've got the Sun and Saturn conjuncting each other, right? So the Sun and Saturn will have an influence upon each other. Here, you might guess that's an opposition, but it's not. So you always want to take the planetary aspect from the divisional chart, which would be what we're seeing here when we're looking at these red numbers between the Sun and Saturn. So during Sun-Saturn Dasha, there can be some particular problems with him doing business, because here we see the 7th house, which would be related to doing business, right? So there can be some problems with that. Equally, there can be some hindrances to one's success during a Venus-Sun cycle or Sun-Venus, or during a Venus-Moon cycle, because of both of these planets being enemies of Venus, right? So all in all, though, it's a pretty strong Dashamsha chart overall. So we're looking at the overall strength of it when we're looking at this, okay? Let's look at some of those planets. So we want to see, we're looking at the 10th. Let's look at Saturn first, because that's the critical planet. Sorry, I forgot that. And here we see Saturn in a Yama, Dashamsha, which would mean that he has, good discipline and a good sense of business discipline, okay? His 10th Lord, which is Venus, is in a Rakshasa Dashamsha, which means he probably would have taken some unorthodox approaches towards being successful. I don't know much about his life. I tend to not follow celebrities and things like that. Use their charts because they're easy things to do, but I tend to not follow them. So if anybody knows anything, you can feel free to let me know. And then we've got the sun, which is related to the path. Does he have a strong vocational path? Well, we see the sun's in Swati, which is a very creative nakshatra, and it's also in a Padmaja Dashamsha. Okay, now here's an interesting thing. You see all these words afterwards, like south, southwest, northwest. If you find confluence with other factors, such as the Rashi a planet is in, or directions associated with the nakshatras, and you find confluence with the particular dashamsha, this can actually be the direction that success comes from for the individual. Okay? So we'll take a break with this one. I'm just doing some simple examples tonight and see if anybody has any questions on this.
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
That's a great example. I didn't know the strengths of Shadbala. Is that going to differentiate from different? Is it always like 300, 330 in all the divisional charts? Yeah,
it's going to appear, if you have Kala, it's going to appear as being the same number in all the divisional charts, unless you do this. And I'm going to do this, and it may mute my voice. But let me try anyway.
But what's considered for any strength? You said, like, is each planet 300 or 330? Do you know the strength on each planet? Could you give us that?
Yes, yeah, I will do that. But basically, there's a way that you can change this system to be reflected by the Baladi Avastas and Jagradati Avastas, which is a little more complex. And I'll talk about that over the course, but you're not going to go too deeply into that tonight. Let's switch back to Shadbala.
Yeah, I was used to when Ernst had it just come up. He used to didn't have the Shadbala come up.
Well, he changed some things in relation to that and wanted to put this in the screen because he noticed there were some inaccuracies in terms of looking at health-related factors.
I see.
It wasn't turning out as being as accurate as he had hoped, and so he started playing around with full Shadbala planets. And a good simple way to think about it is when you're looking at, if you understand the Baladi Avastas and Jagradati Avastas, you're looking at the natural tendencies of the individual. Do they have the awareness to do this? Are they going to have to work harder to make this happen? So they're important to look at with those numbers too. But basically, when you're looking at the full Shadbala of the planet, you're looking at the potential that planet has. It's just, let's say, for instance, if that planet is Mrita or dead or Sushupti, meaning asleep, then the individual is going to have a harder time working with that planet, even though it has potential.
Okay, got it. So the blue's sleeping, right?
Yeah. So basically the minimum number in terms of Shadbala strength. If you have Kala, you can find that by bringing this up.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
And what it'll say down here at the bottom, and it's always the same. The sun needs to have a minimum of 390.
Okay.
The moon, 360. Mars, 300. Mercury, 420. Jupiter 390, Venus 330, and Saturn 300.
Okay.
But if a planet doesn't have that minimum strength, which you'll always find, in most instances, you'll find one in each chart. I think if we're looking at Bill Gates's chart here, I don't think he has one planet that's under its minimum Shadbala. But you'll generally find there's one planet that's under its minimum Shadbala, and many times that's Mercury, because Mercury gets combust a lot. And so it makes it more difficult on Mercury, because that's one of the things that's taken into consideration with Shadbala. So basically, when a planet is below its minimum amount, it really has to have some friends helping it out. Which if you see a lot of green numbers in association with that planet, then it may not be as bad as it seems, so to speak. Okay. Let's look at another chart. Maybe we can find some examples of that. Does anybody else have a question? No. Okay. let's go to we're going to look at Jimi Hendrix's chart, and we're going to look at his Navamsha. Okay, so it's always a good thing to do to look at the Ashadha of the planet. Okay, well, actually, interestingly enough, you see a weak sun.
Mm-hmm.
But this guy was a rock star. So how does that happen, right? And so you'd kind of wonder that. You'd go, how can it happen that there's a weak sun and this person is highly successful? Well, if you look at that, you've got a really a lot of help from Jupiter here.
I see.
Yeah. And that helps at those particular times. Jupiter is really, basically what you're looking at is you're looking at the aspect that Jupiter would create to that sun. And that's a pretty strong aspect. Between 0 and 60, that's a 40 rupa aspect. Okay? And so that's what you're looking at when you're looking at that. There was another weak planet here too, if I remember correctly, which is his Venus. His Venus is weak also. And it's interesting too, because I was looking at this earlier. Hendrix died around 1970, I believe. And we can look at this and we can see that had he continued, probably a good 8 years later, he would have had some problems with his career. Because Venus rules that 10th house. Oh, sorry, we're looking at the Navamsha. Let's go to the Dashamsha. Venus still rules the 10th house there.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And it's, you know, it gets hurt by the sun. So there would be some, first and the 10th houses would both be creating some struggles for each other during that time. Because Venus hurts the sun and the sun hurts Venus. So those areas, his vocational path would have a lot of problems during that time. But we wanted to look at the Navamsha. So we have to remember this is a weak Venus, right? So Hendrix basically, in terms of the purpose of his path, there were certain times that it was stronger than others. So let's look at this from a purpose thing. He tended to not make the wisest decisions, and he would sign any contract that was put in front of him initially and didn't always do the wisest things just because he wanted to do music. Relationships were also a very troubled point for him, and here we can see that being reflected in a weak Venus. Venus is the ruler of that 9th house. Okay, so quite often he would, and there's some other mitigating factors in the Rashi chart because obviously he was a very spiritual guy, but there were some problems with him feeling a sense of purpose on his path and feeling like he could, in terms of relationships, really feel like he could settle with one person for any particular period of time. So then we want to see the strength of Mars, right? So, he was willing to put a lot of effort into things, but he needed distance in terms of relationships, we can see, because Mercury here is in Anuradha Nakshatra.
Michael,
So,
would you have to change that bottom where it says?
Oh, thank you. Well, no, it's going to be the same.
Okay, so it will be the same.
Yeah, because it's all the Ashadha is the same in everyone.
Okay.
If you're looking at the Jagradati Avastas, it's going to be different.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this is just a simple way we work with this. So let's look at some of the deities connected with it. Venus is in a Rakshasa, Navamsha. So Hendrix never had any long-term girlfriends. So he was, kind of always open in terms of his relationships. And you can see that being reflected through the Rakshasa Navamsha. Okay, in terms of looking at that third lord, that's also Rakshasa as well. So in terms of his relationships and long-term bonds in his life and things that he wanted to find a sense of purpose in, he would always take a little bit of a radical or unorthodox approach to things. And as was reflected in his music, which is another third house matter, right? So these are just some of the ways you can begin to incorporate this. Just to give you an understanding of how precise these things tend to be, I recently had a client and I was looking at their Dashamsha chart, which is the 20th divisional chart. And they had had a problem with somebody in their life gossiping about them, right? And I was looking at their 6th house, which was being activated in their Vimshamsha at that time. And it was associated with the deity Bagalamukhi, which is called upon. It's a particular deity that's called upon to keep people from gossiping. It's also associated with black magic and to keep black magic at bay. And it was really interesting that I think it was her 6th cusp was in a Vimshamsha that was connected with Bagalamukhi. And so you'll find some very precise things, especially if you work with the house cusps with these. And these are the things when you begin to learn to work with them. And we'll go more in depth with each of these in the course. It's just I'm limited by time tonight. But basically, you can get a lot of depth in a consultation, especially if you learn how to work with the Varga deities and if you work with house cusps in general. So we're going to take questions for the next 5-10 minutes, or as many as people have. And please do feel free to ask. And don't be shy. See, I shouldn't have told you you'll be on YouTube.
Can I ask a question about Nakshatras? No, it's kind of off topic, but maybe not. I was curious if there were any Nakshatras, if somebody was adopted. I remember you saying something in a class that there's a certain nakshatra or certain things you noticed that when somebody has this, maybe the sun and moon together. No,
it wasn't so much that. I have found a lot of instances of eclipses. People born on eclipses being adopted. Because if you think about it, the sun is the father and the moon is the mother. It doesn't always make that, of course, right? But if other factors are there, the person is eclipsed from their parents, so to speak. Or, you can also see, let's say, for instance, if, the 4th house here, let's go back to the Rashi chart. I wish I could think of somebody who was adopted, and I'd use, some famous person who was adopted. Let's say, the 4th lord here is Mars. Well, if you had somebody born on an eclipse and they had K2 conjunct the moon and Mars, so to speak, that could, mean that the person never knew their, mother. Maybe their mother died when they were younger. Or, yeah. So there's all sorts of things like that.
Okay.
Yeah. But in terms of nakshatras, nakshatras really what they're related to are how we grow things. And they're very, very important because they're going to determine how that planet is going to function. It's going to give it a lot more of the subtle tonalities to a particular planet. And I'm firmly convinced that nakshatras are something that are not explored enough. And it's mainly because people don't know a lot of techniques to work with them. But if you learn the nakshatras, and one of the prime things to understand is the well-being of the moon in a chart. If there's a weak moon, then more of the difficult tonalities of a nakshatra will come out than will happen if there's a strong moon. A lot of it depends on planetary aspects, etc. Yeah, so the nakshatras are a lot harder to work with. You have to really do your homework or have really good intuition. But if you're born at moonrise or something like that, you will likely have less of a problem with that. Anybody else with any questions?
Well, Michael, just one thing on the subject of nakshatras and also of Bagalamukhi, who you were just referring to. That's actually one of the 10 Mahavidyas. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with that, but it's a very special goddess, actually. And I would encourage everyone to research those D60 deities, if that's Bagalamukhi, I believe you were referring to.
No, it's a Vimshamsha.
Vimshamsha, yes, correct. The D20, that's correct.
And the D20 has a lot of the
Shaktis.
Mahavijjas, yes.
Yes, the Shaktis, yes, of course. So, but that's I love that you brought that up. That's actually a very interesting subtlety. But speaking of nakshatras, I was kind of curious about what you feel related to Varga charts, as most of the Varga charts, of course, as you look at them, they are Rashi related.
Exactly. So
there is something with nakshatras that some of us feel, and it's not just a feeling from research. It will lead you to believe that it's possible that the original zodiac of India was nakshatra based.
I completely feel that was the case. The first talk in astrology in terms of written records in Vedic astrology refer to the nakshatras. But something else I think you might have been asking is when you look at the Varga charts, you'll notice in this particular screen, well here, let's switch to a particular divisional chart. You'll see the sun here in Taurus, and it's in Anuradha Nakshatra. Now, quite often I find people get confused and they go, well, shouldn't the sun be in, like Rohini or something like that?
That's his Rashi chart, correct? Reflected in his Varga?
It is, because basically the nakshatras are astronomy.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a whole other can of worms there.
Because but basically, go ahead.
It's interesting looking at this because the Vargas being so Rashi based, and to understand Vargas, you really, or to calculate them, you need the Rashi. Yeah. And when you do a lot of research, you'll realize how much the Greeks really, like the Yavana, Jataka, all those things that came from foreigners. Yavana means foreign, right? It came to mean Greek, but you start looking at things and you realize how much Greek, Persian influence came into India at a specific time.
Yes. Yes.
So it's fascinating looking at this because it's not that it's inaccurate. It's definitely accurate. It's definitely very potent. And I'm just kind of curious because the nakshatras being the original system of India, if you start doing that research, how it would tie into Vargas. There's people that debate that. There's even people
you mean in terms of whether it should be in a different...
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of, I'm such a research nerd, that everyone seems to have a different opinion. There's even those of that persuasion that will say that they use nakshatras based on the planetary degree in the divisional charts.
But you see, I have found, number one, if you take the position, because I work with the analogy that, okay, if you're born and let's say we're looking at Jimi Hendrix, right? And
yes.
At Jimi Hendrix's birth, you looked up in the sky and the moon was near the stars in Pusha Nakshatra. Then that doesn't mean that just because the moon is in Pisces in his Navamsha chart, that it's going to be in a different area of the sky.
Right. Yes, and that's why they focus so much on fixed stars. And if this graha was aligned with, with this certain star like Chitra or, one of these stars, and it had this meaning, even going into reading omens. Right. I see what you're saying.
But I have found, I've played with both sides of that. I have found taking the nakshatra from the Rashi chart and keeping it throughout to give more accuracy and interpretation.
Aha, beautiful. Okay.
Especially if you work with the Lajatati Avastas. There's a whole other system I could go into with this too, in terms of looking at the Lajatati Avastas and the Nakshatra lords and everything like that. But you can get a lot of depth through doing that. And equally, if you use Rashi aspects in the divisional charts in tandem with the nakshatras, and in addition to that, incorporate Tara.
The Tara, yeah, beautiful.
Into it. You get a lot, and what's really wonderful about the nakshatras is you're getting a look at a subjective individual, which quite often you'll look at these charts of famous people and you'll look at the subjectivity, and it does not really reflect the objective things that went on in their life. And you have to consider that they all had like secret lives.
Of course. And then and then you get the paras. You also get the charan or the paras as well of the nakshatras, which I think people are grasping at trying to work.
Yeah.
You know, and that they're very important. But I think a lot of us are still groping in the dark. I think in astrology in general.
Well, you know, one model I'd like to leave everybody with on that subject before we depart, and sometimes I say it and I feel like I'm talking a bunch of foof, so to speak, and people don't know what I'm saying. But basically in Brihat Parashara Horus Shastra, it's mentioned that the planets are conscious incarnations of Vishnu.
Yes.
So the planets are conscious living beings. The nakshatras, there's not really mentioned much in Brihat Parashara Horus Shastra. What I've come to learn in terms of how nakshatras function and what they're associated with, which is the moon, the nakshatras are responsible for growing our relationship to those conscious incarnations of Vishnu.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, you'll find a lot of the nakshatras actually, you'll find more about nakshatras through the Rig Veda,
yes,
through the Purans or Puranas,
yep,
Shastras, in the different scriptures, you'll actually find more, even the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, you'll find more mention of nakshatras there.
Most definitely.
So it is more, it's a harder thing to grasp.
It is. But what is also said in Brihat Parashara Horus Shastra about the Rashis is that the Rashis are the unconscious limbs of Vishnu. So there's no consciousness in the signs unless there's a planet there. And obviously there's going to be a nakshatra in every sign. But other than that, these are just divisions of the sky. There are 12 equal divisions of the sky that can be further subdivided, right?
Yes.
So how do we deal with this concept of something conscious, meaning the planets, something conscious, meaning the nakshatras, which have the Shakti of the deities, and then something that's unconscious? Well, the unconsciousness is the Maya that we go through. So beneath that surface, there's a lot more. Anyway, I have to stop there for tonight because it's bedtime for my son.
Oh, wonderful. So sorry. I hope I didn't take up the time.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. It's been a pleasure sharing with everybody. You know, just to leave it with everybody, if you want to participate in the full course that starts on the 14th, you can sign up through my website. If you go to authentic.astrology.com, there's a link to the courses page there. And underneath that, there's a link to take you to the registration page for the course. And you can sign up either by semester or for the full course. Okay? So it's been wonderful sharing with everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. Good night. Bye now.
Good night.
Bye-bye.